Good afternoon. Welcome to your weekly edition of the Wrap. I'm Travis Fain, one of WRAL's state government reporters.
And I'm Bryan Anderson, another one of WRAL's state government reporters.
And we got maps this week, finally, after a long, drawn-out process that was not so long and drawn out because it was condensed by the court. But the court signed off on maps, two drawn by the General Assembly, the House and Senate maps that the General Assembly drew in this latest redraw, and then a congressional map, Bryan, that was redrawn by the court itself.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've had maps. The problem has been, what is the map? And if you take a rewind back to November, you would see the Republican legislature's map was potentially an 11-3 edge for the GOP. And this is in a state that's nearly evenly divided politically with a Democratic governor in Roy Cooper, and a state that Trump won by less in 2020 than he did in 2016. And so we had this redraw, and the court decided to go with its own plan, which was drawn in conjunction with some help from special masters who are just independent redistricting experts. And right now that looks like it'll be an 8-6 swing likely for Republicans, but in a good election year for Democrats, it could be 8-6 for them. But right now what we're seeing is 7 likely Republican seats, 6 likely Democratic seats, and 1 that's a toss-up, which is the 13th congressional district.
Yeah, the 13th, that's Southern Wake, it's Johnson County. You're going to get lots of mail if you live there. I promise. Someone on Twitter, I wish I could remember who, said they were just going to put a trash can underneath their mailbox.
Yeah, you're going to have no shortage of campaign mailers in the southern tip of Wake. You've got Johnston, like you said, and even a little bit of Harnett and Wayne in there as well. So it's an interesting mix of some of these rural communities and suburbs in there as well.
Yeah, and so it's kind of an evenly split map in kind of a quote unquote normal year based on past election results. But I think you and I both expect this to be a strong year, as many do for Republicans, and that will play out in North Carolina as well. So, I mean, we could be, what, 9-5 maybe when it all comes down to it here this year. But who knows? That's why they hold the elections, right? We should also note this is a one-cycle map. So they're going to use it this one time, and then assuming Republicans continue to hold majorities at the General Assembly, which is likely, although in the House, who knows? I mean, we could end up even with a tie between Republicans and Democrats under the new state House map. But assuming Republicans hold that majority, they may redraw this congressional map. They may win a majority on the Supreme Court this year. There are 2 seats up on the Supreme Court this year. And if that happens, you could see Republicans redraw that congressional map and then get the Supreme Court to try to bless it. Long way down that road, but we could be doing some of this again.
And it's currently a 4-3 Democratic Supreme Court here in North Carolina. And there are 2 current Democratic seats that are up for grabs in this election cycle. One is Sam Ervin, and the other is another seat that Robin Hudson is retiring out of, and Lucy Inman seems to be the Democratic presumptive Supreme Court nominee, and she'll square off against a Republican who we don't know yet would compete with her. But the interesting thing I should note is, while the trial court did give the congressional map a redraw of its own, it said the legislature's redrawn state House and state Senate maps could stay. So you had Republicans upset with the congressional redraw from the trial court, and you had the Democrats and voting groups upset that the trial court upheld the legislature's state House and state Senate maps. And like you said, Travis, state House, it could potentially be 60-60 in one of these scenarios. And the state Senate seems like it's pretty safe for Republicans to take that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to give Republicans the benefit of the doubt too in the House as well, that they're going to hold that. Until I see it, that's what I'm going with. Of the people who've announced so far, or that we know who are going to announce, let's just talk congressional really. What stands out to you as far as who's running where right now?
So a few things stand out. There were 3 top high-profile potential candidates. You have Madison Cawthorn, who currently represents the state's westernmost district, and that is the 11th under this new map. Madison Cawthorn, you might remember last fall, he had a little tiff with House Speaker Tim Moore, who had been mulling a run of his own. And even as of last week, he said that he was still considering running for Congress in his congressional district, which would be different from Cawthorn's. But this new map pretty much makes that impossible for him, because he would be running in a seat that was currently held by Patrick McHenry. We're recording on a Friday, and today McHenry just said he's running in that new 10th district. So where does that leave House Speaker Tim Moore? His only option is the new 14th, which includes some of Mecklenburg, some of Gaston County, which is just outside the city of Charlotte. But that is likely a Democratic seat. And it's one that State Senator Jeff Jackson is considering running. He failed to win the party's nomination for state Senate, dropping out of that race to make Sherry Beasley the presumptive
U.S. Senate.
Yes, but current state senator, former U.S. Senate candidate. And Jeff Jackson is someone who could win this seat if he runs. There's a lot of interest. He has some money in his war chest from his U.S. Senate campaign that he just ended.
Yep. And I'll highlight in the 13th, which is going to be, I think, the most interesting race. I think you said that currently State Senator Wiley Nickel is the only Democrat in that race. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, looking at the latest campaign filing, you have Nathan Click and Wiley Nickel, who are the two candidates, but Wiley Nickel being the more prominent one. That's on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, there's Devon Barber, Chad Slotta, but there's also one candidate you know a little bit about, Travis.
Kelly Daughtry, who put apparently, and I haven't seen the paperwork, but according to her consultant, $2 million of her own money in. This is Leo Daughtry's daughter. She is an attorney. Leo Daughtry, of course, former House member, former General Assembly member. I think he was in both the House and Senate, and is on the Board of Governors. And again, in a very competitive district, so kind of a slice down the middle district. I think it's D+3, if I remember, or R+3, one of the two. Speaking of competitive districts, we've gone in the redrawn map that the General Assembly approved after the Supreme Court threw out the first map, if everybody can follow that. We had 4 like really competitive districts. People were shocked how competitive it was going to be. And you know, there's a line of thinking that it's better to have competitive districts. It makes people less likely to play to the fringes. It allows moderates to gain power. And we've gone from 4 of those under the General Assembly's redraw to 1 under what the special masters redrew. So I think that's interesting. I don't know fully what I think of that, but I thought we were going to maybe get a chance to test this theory that districts where moderates can do well improve our politics, and now I don't know that we will.
And Republicans are always free every election cycle to redraw a U.S. House map if they want. But the problem is, what incentive do you have to do that whole undertaking if you're also not going to redraw the legislative maps? And the challenge for next election cycle for Republicans will be, what do you do with this congressional map? How does it look? Can it get through the court system? And can you get it through a conservative Supreme Court if you retake that? So there's certainly a lot of moving parts. One interesting thing I would note with this interim map that's just used for 2022's congressional races, Republicans haven't ruled out the possibility of an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. So this map is finalized in North Carolina. This candidate filing period has just opened up and resumed after a 2-month delay. But Republicans are sort of poking the idea of maybe a U.S. Supreme Court appeal. How likely that is to be is another question.
Yeah, y'all do that anytime after 5 p.m. today, Friday. And, I will say words out loud, probably behind your back. Real quick, I want to mention something maybe coming down the pike. Former House Majority Leader Paul Skipstam, Apex attorney, y'all know him. He's a former lawmaker. He wrote a letter to the Wake County commissioners, to their county attorney, and he said, hey, because of what the Supreme Court said about redrawing legislative districts, you've got to draw county commission districts, because in Wake County, even though there are districts for each commissioner, they're supposed to live there, they're all elected countywide. So there are no Republicans. Even though there are some pretty heavy pockets of Republicans in Wake County, it is easily a heavily Democratic county. No response, at least last time I checked, from Wake County on that. But that's one of those little that's the next shoe to fall, right? Like people using this new precedent that the Supreme Court is establishing and making any number of arguments with it, including that county commissions have to redraw their lines.
And that state Supreme Court ruling that came out had some general guidelines of here are some tests you could run to try and get a fairer map. But this isn't there's no good playbook with it must do this in order to be compliant. So there's just a lot of open questions, and some are trying to read into that Supreme Court ruling and extrapolate out to local elections.
This process, though, has clarified that. You go from the initial order and then a 217-page, probably including the dissent opinion from the Supreme Court. And a lot of people focused on a paragraph that said, basically, you have to be within XYZ on this mean median score, XYZ on this efficiency gap score. And then that ended up being the paragraph, really, that the lawmakers used when they redrew. And then it was quoted again in the lower court, the trial court's blessing of those maps. So we seem to have winnowed this thing down to that paragraph or two of instructions. How strong that is, whether that will hold, I will not say. I am not an attorney, but that one kept coming up. Speaking of Madison Cawthorn, he's in federal court on Monday in Wilmington, a lawsuit he has brought against the State Board of Elections to try to preemptively stop any inquiry into whether or not he is qualified to be on the ballot in North Carolina. There are a group of voters led by a number of attorneys who were saying, hey, he incited the mob on January 6th. That makes him an insurrectionist. Insurrectionists under the 3rd section of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution cannot run for office. It's kind of a test case that could have some national implications for other politicians who are involved in one way, shape, or form in January 6th. So that's a process that proceeds or would proceed at the State Board of Elections level. They basically investigate it and make a decision whether or not he can be on the ballot. He is seeking to enjoin the State Board of Elections from doing that, arguing before a federal judge that it violates, among other things, his First Amendment right. And again, that there will be a hearing on that Monday. We may have a decision from the judge on Monday. I'm not sure, but I think a decision will come soon.
And Madison Cawthorn went to CPAC down in Florida, and he spoke a little bit about this issue, and he said that this could set a dangerous precedent. He says, if they come after me first, who knows who can receive this 14th Amendment candidacy type challenge in the future. So Cawthorn's really trying to portray himself as this could be the start of something bad for Republicans. And one interesting thing is he went on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News earlier this week and said that the people challenging his candidacy are, quote, very close, end quote, in his words, to having him off of the ballot. So it's something he's taken seriously for sure.
Yeah, I think it's something that when it first got filed, I know looked at it and said, what? And then as we looked at it more closely, this is a real thing. And it is very much worth paying attention to. So we'll see how that goes. Speaking of CPAC, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson was there as well. The draw of Orlando, Florida, brought many people down there. Kind of a similar bombastic speech as the lieutenant governor is known to give. There was some interesting biography information about his mother that I had not heard him say before, about how she worked very hard at a local college after his father died. That was interesting. If you catch the speech, I'm sure it's still online. That was kind of down near the bottom. Some of the things, the headlines, though, he said, COVID is real, but Democrats are the real virus. That's kind of a repackaging of him repeatedly over the last 6 months or so, calling Democrats the enemy. He called Biden incompetent and incontinent, called him a nitwit.
But deep down, he really likes him.
Yeah. Well, and he also said, and this I think was the first time I've heard him say this, although I'm sure he said it before. He basically said he didn't believe Biden won the election. He said he didn't believe 83 million people voted for him. In fact, he didn't believe 83 million people knew who he was. In fact, he didn't think Joe Biden knew who Joe Biden was, which was the lead into the incontinent and incompetent line. So kind of somehow that doesn't really raise eyebrows because it's the status quo for the highest ranked Republican in state government to just say the election was full of fraud. I don't know what to do with that. I haven't known what to do with it for a while. The reality denial continues apace, I guess.
But one thing that I should note with Robinson as well is I've spoken with people who have told me when it comes to Robinson and some other folks, the attention is the goal. The goal is the attention. So I was talking and just thinking, like, with these comments that come out, some of the anti-LGBTQ comments, there's so many stories you can write off of Robinson said X, but you really have to look at the why is he saying these things, and give Robinson credit as well. He's a lieutenant governor who has gotten a lot of attention in a role where lieutenant governors typically aren't talked about. So that says something about his ability to get name recognition, to attract voters. And don't forget, just a few years ago, he was in this jungle primary with lots of candidates, and he was the one that emerged from that crowded pack.
The man has cracked the code. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I will mention briefly, a new dark money group popped up. It's called Carolina Strong. I'm not entirely sure who all is involved with it. Anna Scott Marsh, who I believe did some fundraising for Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, is on the invitation. A number of lawmakers, including Brendan Jones and Destin Hall, are on the invitation for next week's launch. It says it's going to focus on transportation, infrastructure, engineering, and I rarely have seen this. Maybe I have never seen this, but down at the bottom, it had some not so fine print that said, hey, lobbyists are free to donate unlimited amounts of money to this. You don't really see that said out loud a lot. Lobbyists at the General Assembly not allowed to donate to regular campaigns, but they are allowed to donate to, say, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and in this case, 501c4s, also known as dark money groups, like this new Carolina Strong group. I'm always looking for people to flag new groups like that, or old ones that are having events. Send me those invitations. tfane@wral.com. What else you got, Bryan?
I think there's two other interesting things to me. One is it was a slow week at the legislature because we were waiting to see what maps would finally be enacted for the 2022 election. But there was one notable thing that happened on the legislative front, and that was Governor Roy Cooper vetoing the Free the Smiles Act. And what that basically would have done, Senate Bill 173, is it would have let parents choose whether their children could wear masks, not wear masks inside the classroom. Governor Cooper said this is unnecessary, could tie the hands of local public health officials. We agreed last year that this should just be left up to local public officials and education officials to decide at the school board level for themselves. And Cooper saying we should just stick to that. They're undoing the mask mandates themselves. This is unnecessary. The interesting thing is it got enough bipartisan support to override a veto. It passed the legislature with 28 votes, and you need 30, but two of those people were absent or Republican. So it had two Democrats on board and with the Senate side of things, which is enough to override that veto. In the House, it got 76 votes. You need 72 to override a veto. And Tim Moore has said he would like to bring this up for an override vote. So it's not officially dead yet, but it would require the Democrats who supported the bill to also support an override, which hasn't really happened in recent history. I believe 2018 is the last time we saw an override.
Yeah, I don't think Cooper has lost a veto override vote since Democrats broke the supermajority. But this could put some people in a hard way. We would almost have to look at the new maps and everyone's district, every Democrat's district who voted for it the first time, to see what sort of position this would put them in. I'm sure that calculus is being done or has been done, because an override vote is a good way to produce mailers that say so-and-so voted against children, et cetera. And it is an issue that has resonated with parents, and I suspect will continue to resonate with parents, although that should wane as school systems move away from these mandates.
Yeah, I was joking on Twitter. My mentions are relatively quiet on redistricting stories. I tweeted a link to that story, and the parent comments. This is an issue that people are very, very, very passionate about, and one that's not going away anytime soon. The other story I'd mention for folks, or the other story I'd mention for folks to keep their eye on is this weekend, there's going to be the first televised US Senate Republican debate, and that will not feature one notable name, and that's Ted Budd. He's a congressman from the Greensboro area running for US Senate, and he's at CPAC this week and says that he will not be entertaining the conversation of a debate until candidate filing has ended. And his campaign basically argues, why have a debate when we don't even know who the field of candidates are? And the other three candidates, Marjorie K. Eastman, Mark Walker, Pat McCrory, are attending, and they say, well, it's pretty obvious who's running. Why are you hiding? So we have entered past redistricting to the debate about debates. So never a shy moment in North Carolina politics.
Hey, it's progress. We're moving quickly toward the May 17th primaries. Amen. I think that's enough for today, unless you've got anything else, Bryan. I've got a story running, I think, on Sunday about ID Me, which is a private company that people had to submit their photographs to in order to get unemployment benefits in North Carolina and in other states. Turns out they've got a pretty large facial recognition database. And so we're kind of delving, hey, what's going to happen with that if your picture is in there? So check that out on Sunday at nccapital.com. Other than that, I'm done.
Let's call it a week that's been a month. It's felt like a month, but the week is over and onward and upward to the next busy times ahead.
North Carolina politics, where we live our lives in dog years. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Unplug and enjoy it, and we'll keep you updated next week on the wrap.